name is Adam Hanlon, and welcome to Wetpixel Live. We'd like to thank Backscatter Underwater Photo and Video for sponsoring this episode. Backscatter have a huge range of housings, ports, and pretty much anything an underwater image maker could need. Please head on over to backscatter.com to check them out, and obviously to show the support that they offer us. I'm joined by our regular contributor, Alex Mustard. Hi, Alex.
Hey, Adam. Nice to be here.
Always nice to see you. And I thought we could talk today about something that's very kind of topical, really, and that's how to work with dive guides. Very much part of what we do. So Alex, can you give us some tips on how to work with dive guides, please?
Well, I mean, first of all, I'd say it's a very valuable thing to think about as a photographer, because it can make having a good working relationship with a dive guide can make a huge difference to your productivity and your ability to create really strong images. Also, thinking about all the friends around the world who I'm missing at the moment, not being able to travel. Actually, these are people that, you develop long-term friendships with, and that, I think, as excited as I will be to be getting back out there and seeing the world and seeing the diving again, actually, I think it's the friends I've made around the world in resorts and places and shared amazing experiences with down the years that I perhaps miss even more. And I'm most excited about, when we are able to travel again, getting back out there and enjoying. And it's those relationships and those experiences that you've shared with dive guides that I think one of the richest rewards of underwater photography, irrespective of the image making.
And I think sometimes the guys are responsible for creating, maybe the wrong word, but responsible for putting us in the right place to experience those amazing. So it's not just a simple thing of sharing with them. You are sharing with them, but they're also responsible for putting you in the right place for that experience to happen. So they're people that really, really do have a profound impact on our photography, I think. Absolutely. Yeah.
I think it's also important for us to note the fact that I think most people who've turned this video on are very much thinking about a dive guide or DM as that classic Asian dive guide who is diving with you in small numbers, showing you critters. But actually, dive guides form very different roles around the world. And I think it's worth us just mentioning that before we sort of dive into what I think everyone is expecting us to talk about. And that's the kind of classic critter diving dive guide or Asian, Southeast Asian reef diving dive guide. So first of all, depending on the part of the world, dive guides have different roles to achieve with photographers in places where the diving is perhaps more intensive, more challenging. There's a very much a primary role of allowing people to explore the dive site in a safe way, seeing all the sites that there are to see, but at the same time making sure that everyone is coming back safely with the right amount of air and not too much decompression time and that sort of thing. So I think that's a key aspect of what a dive guide is doing in many parts of the world. But I want to focus more on the photographic aspects in this talk, and I don't want to belittle those things, but we're here, it's a photography chat after all. And I think the dive guides, for example, places I dive like the Maldives, like the Red Sea, the dive guides there aren't primarily there to find animals for us. They're there to guide us around a dive site. But photographically, we may well be benefiting obviously from them taking us to the best bits. But also they I think perform a good role as models in our pictures. And that's something that I think you can benefit from most dive guides. I would say the positive side of using dive guides as models is that they are always brilliant divers. The downside is they often have the world's worst diving equipment in terms of it's not looks tatty and that sort of thing. And I have to say that the poses that typically look good in a photo aren't necessarily the poses of a really good diver. And I think that's something to consider a little bit. Around the world, though, I have regularly used lots and lots of dive guides as models, and the ones that really enjoy it very quickly become brilliant models because they're such good divers. So, I think sometimes it requires a little bit of coaching so that they understand how you want them to look. But the good thing is, because they've got all that spare capacity underwater, if you've had a chat beforehand and you can show them your screen during the dive, you can very quickly get them trained up into looking exactly the way you feel they should in the pictures. I typically travel with a model's mask as my spare mask. So I
Yeah.
like to use a dark framed mask that makes it easy to look through a camera as my mask. But I'll travel with a much bigger single piece mask as a mask for my model. And I find that as a spare for me in case my mask breaks, but I'll use that as a model's mask. So I'll usually have a model's mask with me, and that can be a big help because that's probably the most critical piece of equipment to change on someone if you want them to photograph well.
I think I'm going to backtrack slightly, Alex, and I
Mm.
think the point you made earlier about that guides roles vary depending from place to place and from what people's expectations of the guide are. Um, and in some parts of the world, the majority of dive guides primarily are tour guides. Their role is really to take a group of divers from point A to point B, show them some sights along the way, and to do so safely and in good order. That's really what their job and their role is. And unfortunately, as photographers, we tend not to really want that type of guiding. We rarely want to go from point A to point B. May well get to point A, find it's really good and stay there, or go straight to point B and not go to point A at all. And obviously everything in between. And this is something that we possibly need to clear up with our guide in advance. So when we're in an environment, a classic kind of resort environment, where the guiding tends to be a bit of a journey and showing people stuff along the way, we may
Take them
well
deep,
need to.
make them swim against the current, run their air out, bring them back in 20 minutes.
I wasn't going to mention any of that, but yeah, that's right. So the goal here is really to talk to your dive guide and find out what they plan to do on a dive, and obviously then suggest, or as appropriate, that actually what you want from it is something slightly different, and see how you can cooperate to achieve that. And that may well involve things like getting the dive guide involved as a model. That gives them something to do on the dive, so they don't feel like a spare part. They're actually involved, they're active in the dive. And that can be a good way of doing it. But I think it's important. I think a lot of the time where photographers are disappointed about their diving experiences with particular dive guides in that type of environment, because they haven't told them, look, I don't want to go from here to here, I want to stay there. And again, this also, the other issue here is that if they've got a mixed group, so they've got a group of divers who do want to go from point A to point B, and a couple of photographers, it's going to be a nightmare for the guide. The guide is going to have a hard time. It's not a winning solution, because you've got two completely different goals in play here. And neither group's going to be happy. So it's a tough job being a dive guide. I've been
I
one
think the
myself,
point you
so.
made at the beginning of that, which is the critical one, is that you need to communicate. And I
Yep.
think any relationship with a dive guide begins with that communication, not
Yep.
you ordering them around, but
No.
actually understanding what they are hoping to achieve from the dive and explaining to them what you would like to achieve from the dive, and how you can make that work for both of them. Because I've not met a dive guide who doesn't want happy customers. And that's, partly because of the financial returns that might bring to them, but also, their passion for wanting to be a dive guide is to make other people feel as passionate about the world that they've got to show off to you. So, of course, they want you to have exactly the experience that you want, assuming that they can cater for that. So,
Yep.
getting that communication going, I think, is absolutely essential. I'd like to sort of switch over now and talk more about the kind of classic photographer's guide, the DM, the dive guide that we typically think of when we think about dive guides in photography. And those are the ones that are the critter finding dive guides that we dive very closely with in sort of particularly in the critter capitals around Asia. I'd say in a lot of places photographers are doing their best to avoid dive guides, but the moment you show them a much site, they're attached at the hip to their dive guide, because they know that waving
Point.
that magic metal wand will be conjuring
Yeah.
up some amazing critters pretty sharpish.
Yeah.
So in that situation, I think communication is again really important. You need to tell your dive guide what you want from them. That might be a wish list of species. It might be an explanation to them that actually you're not interested in the rarest nudibranch on the reef. You're actually interested in a perfectly common one that's in a really nice position. And they may not normally show that off because they're embarrassed to show you a species that they think you should be able to find on your own. But actually, what you're interested in, and I've had that experience in Lembe, actually. I've been on a dive with the guys and said, look, this dive, guys, I'm just into nudies, and show me the common ones. And
yeah,
I was like going along and I'd found like 5 or so over the first 10 minutes of the dive. And my guide just waves me over and shows me about 30 in about 2 minutes. And he's like, normally I wouldn't point out these species because we see them on every dive. And I'm
yeah,
like, I don't see them on every dive. You
yeah,
know,
yeah,
they're
yeah,
like going to make a fuss and point out the really rare one. And I'm like, no, show me the, no, I want to get photos of all of them. Show
yeah,
me these really, really nice, that I think it may be common, but it's beautiful. So,
yeah,
that communication is really, really valuable. Um, I also think you can get a lot out of the relationship if they understand what you want to do. So for example, if you are specifically interested in certain types of photographs, telling them that you want those photos, and then after the dive, spending time showing them the pictures. And these
mm,
days, all the dive guides have got Instagram and Facebook accounts, posting
yeah,
your pictures and tagging them in it and saying, thank you to this dive guide for getting me this picture. For a
yeah,
lot of those dive guides, that is as valued, if not more valued, than any tip you'll give them.
yeah,
That gives them a real feeling of achievement, that they've done their job well. Their wife, family, friends are all impressed that you've taken a great picture and you've given them their credit in their role in creating that. And I think that's a really great way to build that relationship up.
it's acknowledging the fact that the team here has produced that image. Okay,
Yeah.
we're the ones who press the shutter, but it's very much, if it's working right, the teamwork between a guide and a photographer is a really, really powerful way of creating those images. And that's really important. I think something else that obviously you mentioned, sharing photographs and tagging in dive guides' names and so on and so forth. Um, that we have to bear in mind that dive guides are ultimately doing a job. They're paid to do it. For the majority of underwater photographers, it's a pastime, it's a hobby. This is their profession. And by giving them exposure, by saying, look, this dive guide's helped me to have been part of the team to create this image, that helps enhance their professional credentials effectively. So you are actually doing, that you're helping their CV, for want of a better term. And that's a really, it's not only a nice thing to do, it's actually for them, it's a commercially valuable thing to do. So I really encourage it. I think it's a great way of acknowledging the teamwork and to helping them out too, practically as well. So yeah,
Now, there's something else I was going to mention. Something that comes up quite often when we run our workshop trips is there'll always be, one group within the resort who feel that they've got the blind dive guide. They'll hear about all the amazing things that some other boat is finding and they're not finding it. And they'll be completely convinced that it's their dive guide can't find anything. And there's two facts I say about that. Is it's obviously, first of all, it's impossible for 5 boats to all go out to different dive sites and all have equally good dives. That's
yep,
never going to happen.
yep,
But secondly, I do think the way you behave on the dive makes a massive difference to how much stuff your dive guide can find for you, how much good stuff.
mm,
And if you are difficult to look after, always wandering off, always running out of air, not paying attention to your dive computer, so that your dive guide has to spend part of their dive going, wait a minute, how much air has that moron got? Where are they going now?
where are they?
All the time they're doing that, they're not looking for critters for you.
Yeah,
And so often the time I've seen in my experience that the group that is complaining their dive guide can't find anything, you go diving with them and you immediately see why that group is not finding anything, because their
yeah,
dive guide is spending their whole time dealing with a bunch of people who are not working as a team together, are
yeah,
creating lots of extra jobs for the dive guide to be doing, as opposed to be finding amazing creatures.
yeah.
And I think that is a really big part. You can get a lot out of that relationship by being the most cooperative photographer you can and working in a way that they can predict. And if they tell you to stay in a place, stay there. If they tell you after you photograph this, work your way up the slope, do that slowly so that they can find you again. The guides know what they're telling you. And if you follow their advice, it works really well.
Yeah, yeah. I think that sort of also, while we're on the subject, you, you know, we need to be very careful about the way we communicate with dive guides. You know, you often hear, and it's intended in jest. Well, I hope it's intended in jest. You hear participants saying to guides, "Well, if you find me this, I'll give you an extra $20 or whatever it is, choose your currency." And I certainly hope that these things are intended to jest, but you need to be really careful because ultimately it boils back to this idea, for that guide, that amount of money, it's probably, it's probably quite a big deal. And although it's a joke to you, it's not necessarily a joke to them. So you need to be careful how you phrase that. And certainly, when we hear about sort of somewhat unethical behaviour on behalf of guides, or apparently unethical behaviour on behalf of guides, it's always caused by photographers putting those guides in that position and asking them really to do things, or the guide thinking that the photographer wants them to do something that isn't entirely ethical. So we have I guess it's almost a moral responsibility, but certainly an ethical responsibility to make sure that we don't put guides in that position. I think certainly, and this may be again something when we meeting up with the dive guide, they may have been, the previous clients may not have had the same attitude towards the manipulation of marine life that you do. So I think it's worth setting those ground rules down very early and saying, I don't expect it, I don't want it. If you do it, I'm not happy. And we want to capture stuff as it is. Get those ground rules laid down so they know that you're not going to ask them to do things and the majority of resorts have policies in place saying that they shouldn't do it. But you will get individuals that basically pay the dive guides to do this. And that's very dubious, I think. So get that laid down.
I can't believe there's any dive guide out there who relies on the richness of their local seas for their income, who's going to want to be harassing, damaging, scaring off that wildlife, unless they're being coerced into that by unruly, by misguided photographers. So I think you're absolutely right on that point. The other point I'd make related to that is the fact that I think with the guides, I also think you get a lot of respect from them when you say that, and actually they'll work that much harder. So from a purely selfish point of view, if you push them to do something they don't want to do, and you've got the financial wherewithal to make them do it, they'll do it. If you make them operate in a way that they feel happy with, you're going to get the best out of them personally. And so even if you're only motivated by purely selfish terms, actually making them operate in a level that they feel happy with, you'll actually get the most out of the relationship anyway. So however selfish you are, I don't think you do yourself many favors asking for that sort of behavior.
And I actually think in a situation where acknowledge the teamwork, acknowledge their input into your photographic process and the images you've created by tagging, by sharing images, by communicating, getting involved in the process, that's actually likely to produce a much more productive relationship than simply one where you're bribing them to do things that they don't really want to do. So I think this process of team building is really, really important. Trust
and what leads to those those lasting friendships when you return to resorts year after year that we're all missing at the moment, and we're all just so excited to be hopefully in the next coming months. The other thing I was just going to say about the ethics is also why when we do the Wetpixel critter workshops, we actually do the gratuity as part of the upfront bill, so that there's no emphasis, so that all the dive staff get a very, very strong gratuity on the Wetpixel trips. It's why they love having us there time and time again, and why we keep going back to the same resorts. But at the same time, it takes away any pressure from individuals waving dollar bills to get bad behavior or anything like that. And I think that's a really good way of operating as a group, particularly if you're someone who travels with a group, is say, this is how much we are giving for this. It's there, it's sort of pre-planned, and it stops anyone wanting to deviate from that agreed way of behaving.
And forgive me, we keep doing one more thing, but the other thing about our workshops that we run is we rotate the guides through the group. So the guides effectively are shared throughout the group, and so each day typically a buddy team or a team of divers will have a different guide. And
it's usually every 2 days we change it. Just so you get a couple of days, 6 to 8 dives to work with the dive guide, and then because they're all from one resort, they have quite a similar philosophy anyway. So the change, but that's also just because there are naturally some dive guides who are ever so slightly more exceptional than others.
But you also see is that quite often, as people get used to working with a guide, their productivity improves as well. So a lot of this kind of, I've got the blind guide, actually by day 2 they're like, this guy's the best guy ever.
And I can definitely say, for example, in Lembe, I've heard photographers who've dived with lots of different guides, choose completely different guides as the best guide they've ever
Yeah,
dived with in their life.
exactly. Yeah, yeah.
And you can look at I can look at the board they've got at Lembo Resort, and they've got the photos of all the dive guides on it, and I can go, I can remember that photographer telling me that that guide's their best ever guide of
Yeah,
their life, and that photographer telling me that guide, and you can do the whole lot of them.
yeah, yeah.
Someone somewhere has had, like, so yeah, the whole idea that any of them really can't deliver that exceptional stuff isn't true. It's about you getting the most out of them.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. Yeah, good. Well, I'm not going to do any more things. Thank you very much, Alex. We could keep going, yeah, both of us. And thank you very much, Alex. I look forward to, well, we will hopefully be in Lembo soon to put all this stuff into practice. I'd like to thank Backscatter again very much for sponsoring this episode. We can't do these episodes without our sponsor support, so thank you very much. Please feel free to drop any comments or suggestions in the comment section, and add a like if you enjoyed it. Thank you very much. I look forward to seeing you again soon.